name is Katey Maddox. I live in Miami, Florida, and I'll just be telling you some stories today. We'll be walking through some stories on how to heal from your trauma. So I'm just going to get started. It was 2009 in Waco, Texas, that I met the love of my life. We'd been dating for 5 years, and Dylan and I were going to get married. I worked nights at a bar, and the only problem was Dylan used to get himself into trouble. We'd done 2 premarital courses. Our rings were already picked out. I was so excited. But on August 23rd, 2013, Dylan got himself into trouble one too many times. I was in Austin visiting a girlfriend when his sister called me. Katey, she said. I already knew what she was going to say. He's in jail, isn't he? Yeah. Don't you want to know what happened? No, Tay, I am done. I'm so done. And she said, I get it. I get it. And we hung up the phone. A few minutes later, I get another phone call. You're receiving a collect call from. Do you accept? Yeah. Baby, he started. I'm done. He's like, but it wasn't my fault. I don't care. I hung up the phone. I turned to my girlfriend. We have to go out tonight. I can't deal with this. Dylan and I are done. See, going out in Austin meant going to 6th Street, a rows of bars, clubs, and debauchery that went into the morning. It was there, I think, that my shame stemmed from. I wanted to go out that night and get drunk. I wanted to not face the pain that I knew was coming. I got more than I asked for. Ready, and we met up. We went to 6th Street. We went to the first bar. I had 1 drink. We went to the second bar. I had 1 drink. When I woke up, someone was having sex with me while I was unconscious. I woke up. I half asleep, kind of came out of a daze. I looked at him and I said, what are you doing? And I fell back unconscious. When I woke up in the morning, he was gone. I hoped it was all a dream, but I looked over and saw my jumpsuit on the floor, and I knew that it wasn't. I wondered how he'd gotten it off of me because it was 1 piece head to toe. I sat there, then I got up and I went into the bathroom. I stared at myself in the mirror in shock. Had I caused this? I had wanted to go out that night and get drunk and black out. I sat in an empty bathtub for what felt like hours. But I don't know how long I was there because I'd spent years trying to block that memory from my brain. I knew the house I was in. I had been there before. I called my cousin who lived in Austin. I asked her to come pick me up. And we went to brunch with her friends like it was a normal day. I didn't say a word. And then I drove the 3.5 hours back to Dallas, the empty apartment that Dylan and I lived in. But he wasn't there because he was still in jail. On my 3-hour drive, I tried to process what had happened, losing the love of my life and being raped, all within the same 24 hours. When I got home, it was 6 p.m. I cried and I slept, completely exhausted from the trauma. When I woke up, it was 11 p.m. Trying to figure out, what do I do now? I knew from watching Law and Order SVU, you're not supposed to shower and you go to the hospital and get a rape kit. Trying to get my life together, I start driving to the hospital and I call his sister. I asked her to meet me there, but I don't know if she came. The whole night was a blur. I got to the hospital and I told them I'd been raped. They made me fill out a novel's worth of paperwork. I had to tell my story 30 plus times to everyone from doctors and nurses and admins, police officers, rape counselors, rape crisis center people. Finally, the rape kit. Traces for drugs in my system, STDs, pills, shots. They kept my clothes for DNA evidence. The whole night was physically and emotionally draining. I didn't want to know the results. Just for them to confirm what I thought had happened, being drugged, raped. I got home around 5 a.m. just in time to shower and go to work. I didn't have the emotional capacity to process both losing my boyfriend and my rape. From then on, I was dealing with the breakup from my actual boyfriend, not the night in Austin. The rape was now buried deep in my soul. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't have the emotional capacity to deal with both. I spent the next few weeks into the next year and a half doing anything I could to prevent myself from having to feel any pain or face what was going on inside of me. I got promoted at my job, and I pushed all my conscious energy into my work. I pushed my body into overdrive with sleeping pills to sleep, Adderall to get through my 12 to 14-hour work days, and any free time was spent at the gym or out on Tinder dates, trying to fill that newfound void. The emptiness of the apartment that we lived in for 2 years together was too much. I spent my weekends partying and traveling to music festivals, masking any real feelings with alcohol and ecstasy, which only led to panic attacks, anxiety, and sickness. I didn't ask God why. I didn't think about it, face it, or deal with it. But days turned to weeks and weeks turned to months, and a year and a half later, I had suppressed it so much that it was buried and almost forgotten. The memories and feelings I buried and suppressed were almost gone unless they were triggered by substance abuse. I left my stressful job, and I grew out of going to festivals. I finally reached back out to God, and on a prompting from Him, I moved to South Korea. I thought in doing so and starting a new life completely, that it would take care of any remnants of that time in my life. But it wasn't gone. It was just in hibernation. Sorry, my sound just went out. Fast forward 5 years. I haven't seen or spoken to my ex nor my rapist in years. I was no longer involved in the drugs or heavy partying, and I now owned a 2-year-old accounting company. I loved my work. I was traveling full time, backpacking from country to country, and working as a remote bookkeeper as I went. In October 2018, I finally moved back to the States officially. My past started to bubble up as my life was finally calming down. The memories and feelings I had buried and suppressed had been replaced with fear and guilt. I hadn't even recognized it. But when I was drinking, it showed up. When I was in a bad, compromising situation, it showed up. In intimacy, it always showed up. If a man even showed any sign of pushiness or aggression, even harmlessly, even playfully, it showed up. See, I had attempted dating, but no dating had been right since. It wasn't until 2019 that I even connected the two circumstances. And it was like a flip switch in my head, and I went from enjoyment to intense fear that came out as anger or poured out of my body in the form of tears. See, I'd never consciously faced these feelings before. Most of my panic were high that I rarely had conscious recollection of them, but these feelings were very real, and I felt them in my core. My defensiveness, fear, and very high walls were starting to have an impact on all my relationships. I stopped dating completely. I couldn't bring anyone else into this brokenness that I was facing. Have you ever asked God why? Why did you let this happen to me? Or even, why did you do this to me? I feel like we often ask God why bad things happen. When you ask him, does he answer you? Does he give you clarity? For me, it's like a 50-50 shot. Sometimes the answer is clear and he tells me why. And sometimes we never learn why he let something happen. But I do know one thing. If he allows it, he can use it. Today I'm going to give you an acronym. And you should have a sheet in your guide that has kind of an outline for you to fill in. The first letter of your acronym is A. And A stands for acknowledge your pain. Because you see, before we can use our pain for good and use our trauma for good, we have to acknowledge that it exists. I want you to close your eyes for a second. Imagine you're standing on the platform on the edge of a very high cliff. All you can see are vast canyons and fog. Silence. Your whole life you've climbed up and over the obstacles and the mountains put in front of you, and it's gotten you here. But that platform is only so big. As long as you stay on the platform, you're okay. But to keep moving, you can only walk in circles. Cycles of bad habits and limiting beliefs. Anxiety, addiction, depression, eating disorders. You're stuck. You want to go further over there to see more and be more. And maybe you're aware of the edge, of the abyss down there, your deepest pains and darkest burdens. But you're afraid. You're afraid to look down and acknowledge it. So terrifying. It's so deep and unknown. Or maybe you didn't even notice that there's a drop off. You didn't notice until somebody pushed you and you fell. You land right on the edge. The memories are triggered and you look down. Oh no, I can't go there. That's so scary. What happens if I venture into that pain? It's like a big black hole. What if you can't get out? See, on the other side of that abyss is your purpose. That's where you will be when you have battled and overcome all the obstacles in front of you. Today, I'm going to help you build a bridge to cross that abyss. You're going to venture into the unknown. You're going to venture into that pain and go through it so you can arrive on the other side. See, this bridge, it's going to take you from pain to purpose. If you haven't opened your eyes yet, you can open your eyes. See, choosing to forget or ignore our pain is a common coping mechanism. In medical lingo, this is referred to as dissociation. Psychotherapist and author Beverly Engel describes dissociation as a disconnection between a person's thoughts, memories, feelings, actions, and sense of who she is. During traumatic experiences, dissociation can help a person tolerate something that might otherwise be just too difficult to bear. Mentally escaping the fear, pain, and horror of it. See, we get good at dissociating as a method of survival. Trauma often has other lasting effects, like distress. Distress is defined as extreme anxiety, sorrow, or pain. According to RAINN, the Rape, Incest, and Abuse National Network, 1 in 6 American women is a victim of attempted or completed rape in her lifetime. 70% of rape and sexual assault victims experience moderate to severe distress, a larger percentage than any other violent crime. And 81% of women victims of sexual violence experience significant impacts such as PTSD. See, I didn't even realize that the rape was something I needed to process. I hadn't associated my move to Korea, drug abuse, or anxiety with my rape. See, I had subconsciously said, my rape wasn't that bad. My rape wasn't that bad of a rape because he didn't hurt me. There was no fight. There was no screaming. It wasn't the terrifying experience that you see in movies because I was unconscious. Sarah Newman, managing editor of Psych Central, describes the importance of recognizing our trauma and its effects. She says it's important to talk about traumatic events and actually label them as traumatic. We need to recognize what kind of butterfly effect occurred when that traumatic event took place in our lives. We are rewriting the narrative to acknowledge what couldn't be acknowledged before. Denial and self-blame have to be taken apart at their very foundation. See, when I did start to recognize it for what it was, I was kept in a cycle of lies. There are a lot of people that have it worse than you. You should be grateful. He didn't hurt you. You walked away. You just need to be strong. Pick yourself up and move forward. Satan just told me lies over and over. See, we like to put our pain on a gradient scale. We judge and compare our pain and trauma to others' pain and trauma to see if we deserve to feel the way that we do. Have you ever compared your pain to somebody else's and decided that it wasn't fair? It wasn't fair for you to feel bad about yourself because they had it worse. You should be fine. See, in case no one has ever told you, your pain is justified. You're entitled to feel every feeling that your pain has caused you. In fact, it is your duty to allow yourself to feel your pain. Because if you don't feel it, you can't work through it. And see, it's our duty to work through our pain so that we can be our best self for our family, our friends, our kids, and for ourselves. See, maybe you were told not to talk about your trauma, not to recognize it for what it was. Or maybe it was just too overbearing that you couldn't. Some of us learn as children that we're supposed to suppress our feelings, not acknowledge the negative things going on inside of us. Feelings of anger, fear, guilt, shame, feeling not good enough. But those feelings, they don't go away. They just stay in hibernation for years or even decades. But see, those feelings over time, they turn into shame. See, shame is defined as the painful emotion caused by the consciousness of something dishonorable, improper, ridiculous, done by oneself or done by somebody else. Brene Brown said it best when she said, shame is the most powerful master emotion It is the fear that we are not good enough. Then as adults, we carry that shame into our new relationships. Now we resonate with words like unworthy, broken, or damaged. Does one of those words resonate with you? Does one of them kind of ping at you? For me, the word that played on repeat in my head was damaged. What guy would want to have sex with a girl who went into a panic attack every time he wanted to have sex with her? No. I was damaged goods. See, I hadn't felt this way forever. Feeling damaged was a new feeling. The rape had been 5 years prior, in 2013. But now in 2018, all of a sudden it was like having this surmountable impact on my life. And I was like, where did this come from? I thought it was gone. And God whispered to me, you have to deal with it. And I was like, what? Deal with what? And proceeded to act like I had no idea what he was talking about. See, looking back, it was clearly affecting my entire life, but I didn't see it like that at the time. When I moved back to the States in 2018, I was living on an island in Key Largo, Florida. And the only people I knew there were from the Zumba class that I guest taught in, 50 and older women. So on the weekends, as a 20-something, I would drive up to Miami. And on this particular weekend, I visited a church called VU Church. And they had a guest speaker that day named Mekon Carter. And he did a sermon called Pick It Up. I will never forget that day because that day changed my life. He spoke from the book of Nehemiah, chapter 1, where the Israelites had spent 140 years stepping over the broken rubble of the formerly walled city of Jerusalem. See, they weren't ready to deal with it. They walked over it, around it, avoided it, anything that they could do to move past it and ignore it. For 140 years. God was patient. He waited. And then when he could tell that they were ready, he sends Nehemiah. And Nehemiah calls out, Israel, let's face your it. Let's rebuild your city. Let's make everything new. And see, Nehemiah wasn't just talking about the physical rubble of their city. See, Israel had an emotional rubble problem too. Israel needed healing. You know what the best part of this story is? God waited 140 years for the Israelites to be ready. And when they were ready, he helped them build that city in 52 days. See, at the end of the sermon, Mekon Carter stopped pacing and he looked at us, and it felt like he was looking right at me. And he said, what's your it? What are you avoiding? Not dealing with? Hurt that you're not ready to face? In that moment, God spoke to me as clearly as if he was sitting in the seat next to me. And he said, the rape. I sat so still. I could hide from God. Upon leaving church that day, I had an hour-and-a-half drive back to my house in the Keys. I started pondering the emotions I'd been having and the sermon I had just heard. The rape was 5 years ago. But overnight, it went from something buried to something I was supposed to deal with. How? Where? What? I prayed, God, if you want me to deal with this, I need you to send help. Send me somebody. What pain are you ignoring? or choosing to forget, dissociate from. Because see, whatever that is, that's your it. And it's holding you in bondage. You're on that platform of bad habits and limiting beliefs, shame and brokenness. See, it's a scheme of Satan to hold you in that suffering. And by avoiding it, you're holding out on experiencing the promises of God to make all things new. See, he promises us joy, wholeness, restoration, redemption. 2 Corinthians 5:17 says, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, they are a new creation. The old is gone, the new is here. The only way to combat Satan's lies is with God's truth. He waits until we're ready. And when we are ready, he brings everything we need when we need it. See, when you hear that little whisper, that's God. He's saying, you're ready. It's time to move. So I finally called out to God and said, okay, I hear you. I'll go through it, but I have no idea how. It was November 2018 now. I'm driving in my car back to Miami, listening to a sermon from Pastor Rich from Boo Church. It's 4 a.m. and I'm driving to the airport to go to California. I have a really long flight ahead of me. And Pastor Rich was doing a series called Love Lies, a group of talks on healthy relationships and heartbreak. Each sermon in the series had hit my heart like a pound of bricks. What is one of the worst causes of broken relationships? Bringing in deep pain and hurt from prior relationships. Bleeding on people who never cut you. He went on, and how does one deal with the hurt and pain of prior relationships? I threw up my hands and yelled at the podcast, I don't know, Rich, you're the pastor. You tell me. See, the sermons of the last 3 months had been playing in my head on repeat as he spoke about lust, hurt, and heartache. I had experienced all three. As he spoke about how God is close to the brokenhearted, tears had run down my cheeks. I had been bleeding on people for years. I didn't know why it had taken me so long to recognize it. But in that moment, I was done. See, the second letter in your acronym is C. C stands for commit to healing. See, our God is patient. He waited for me for 5 years, but maybe for you, he's waited 10 or 20 or more. See, now that you have identified your it, you've acknowledged your pain, you have a choice. Do you want to continue to ignore and suppress it? Is that working for you? Is it working for your family, your friends, your relationships? Because it's probably affecting many of the people in your life. Maybe you're sitting here and you're saying, yes, that's me. I want to face my it, but I don't know how. See, the first step is deciding to do so. See, the truth was, I didn't either. I was moving to a new city. I was starting at a new church. I didn't know if they had counseling or where I would even get the help, but I was trusting, and I still trust God's faithfulness. He'd brought it this far. So once again, when I initiated, I decided, and I said, okay, God, I'm ready. He started bringing me the help. In fact, he started bringing it to me before I even knew that I needed it. And I said, okay, God, I see you moving. What do you want me to do first? Because this trauma, it's like an elephant. And how do you eat an elephant? So you don't have to ask him, what are all the things I need to do? Because there will be a lot of things. Just focus on one. What do you want me to do first? See, as I drove to the airport at 4 a.m. listening to this podcast from Pastor Rich, he continued, and he said, how does one heal from the hurt of prior relationships? Forgiveness. Choosing to forgive them despite the pain that they caused you. Right then and there, God spoke to me again. You need to forgive him. It was so clear. I knew it was God. And again, tears started running down my face. Me? Forgive him. See, it wasn't the answer that I was looking for. But there was peace. And there was relief in knowing what the first step was. You see, sometimes we need to decide in our heads before we feel in our hearts. Because if we choose forgiveness and we ask God to help us and change our hearts, he will. 2 Peter verse 3 from chapter 1 says, and his divine purpose has given us everything we need for a God knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and goodness. It might not be today. It might not be tomorrow. But with time, it will come. See, sometimes I think we get confused about what forgiveness is. Before we can define what it is, we need to define what it is not. Forgiveness is not condoning or excusing offenses. Forgiveness is not denying the seriousness of what happened. Forgiveness is a release. It's a release of feelings of resentment and anger in spite of the pain that they caused. To forgive literally means to let go. According to the American Psychological Association, research actually shows that forgiveness is linked to mental health outcomes, such as reduced anxiety, depression, and psychiatric disorders. Forgiveness is not for them. Forgiveness is for you. So you don't need to tell the person that you're forgiving that you forgive them. Choosing to forgive my rapist brought me a whole new perspective on God's forgiveness and his grace. See, forgiving and letting go, despite the pain, is how we show gratitude for God choosing over and over to forgive us for the pain that we cause him. Because he forgives us every time we sin. And it hurts him every time because we sin again and again and again. See, maybe the person you need to forgive is yourself. Maybe you had an abortion. Maybe you caused your own pain. Give yourself grace. He forgave you so that you can forgive anyone. Most importantly, yourself. Acknowledge the event. Acknowledge the pain. Decide you're going to forgive. See, I took Pastor Rich's advice. I made the decision to forgive. I didn't feel it, but I decided it. And immediately I felt lighter, like a weight had been taken off of my back. I prayed for healing, and it came. I stopped engaging in activities that triggered memories and coping mechanisms, and they subsided. I studied the Bible with a new set of eyes. As someone looking for healing and redemption, he heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. Psalm 147:3 had a whole new meaning. Matthew 7:7, ask and you shall receive, knock and the door will be opened. Romans 8:28. And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those he loves and who are called according to his purpose. See, God reminded me that there would be purpose in this pain. I just didn't know what it was yet. See, there's a difference between making a choice and making a commitment. Choices are based on feelings, they're temporary. I choose to eat sushi instead of Thai food. Commitments, on the other hand, last long after the feelings fade. Commitments require dedication and obligation, even in the face of discomfort. See, commitment is defined as an agreement or pledge to do something in the future. The state of being obligated or emotionally impelled. I'm not asking you to make a choice. I'm asking you to make a commitment. Commit to you. See, healing is not comfortable. Working through pain and trauma is emotionally and physically draining. It is exhausting. Carve out time and space for it. Maybe find a quiet place. Maybe you need to go to a hotel for the weekend. Spend some time alone with God and with yourself. Give yourself permission to feel the feelings that you didn't allow yourself to feel. Allow yourself to be hurt, cry, be angry. Maybe you're mad at God. That's okay. Tell God you're mad. You wouldn't be the first. See, we can open the book of Psalms and see the lament of King David crying out and even against God in anger. But it shows God can take it. Better yet, he will meet you where you are. He will give you the strength that you need to move forward. And he will give you the next step. See, there isn't one way to process. Personally, I like writing. In psychology, writing for the purpose of processing trauma is referred to as expressive writing therapy. Expressive writing is not so much about writing what happened as it is how you interpret what happened. Since psychologically traumatic events are ones that have no good explanation, we have painful facts with no story to bind them together. It's like walking by a puzzle piece, a puzzle day after day that is missing a bunch of the pieces. We keep seeing it out of the corner of our eye, but we don't want to work on it. Because see, our minds run on this endless mental cycle of trying to find the missing pieces and we can't. So our natural tendency is to avoid it. But see, writing helps us to organize the pieces. We can discover what's missing, the missing pieces of the puzzle. Maybe we even create blanks to acknowledge that there's no fact to be had for that piece. We will never have all the answers. But now the pieces are out of your head and they're in front of you. It's like a picture. You can look at it. You created a story about your trauma and you can stand back and see it for what it is. You can make sense of it. Maybe not every piece. It's not going to be logical. But you can come to terms with what you see. In your mind that was running on this endless mental cycle, it can stop. It can rest. And now you can move forward. See, after finishing Pastor Rich's sermon as I drove to the airport, I boarded my plane, and for the first time, I intentionally recollected that night in detail. As I wrote, tears poured down my cheeks. It was 9 pages long. See, those fragments, those puzzle pieces for the first time had been put together, and I could look at it and I could read it. See, just because it takes you 20 years to get to where you are doesn't mean it's going to take you 20 years to get out of it. Remember in the story of Nehemiah, God waited 140 years until they were ready to deal with it. And when they were ready, he helped them recover in 52 days. See, God's timing is not our timing. We can have faith in his promise to make all things new. So what was A? Acknowledge your pain. And what was C? Commit to healing. On January 1st, 2019, I decided 2019, that was going to be the year I was going to focus on me, just me and God. No substance abuse, no boyfriends, Jesus, no sex. See, 2019 hadn't been awful. It had had good times and bad, but the bad had been especially dark. But God had brought massive healing in 6 months' time. 2019 was going to be my year of restoration and self-care. But see, I was so unaware of what God had in store. In January of 2019, God spoke to me again. And he said, I want you to publish your story on the blog. And I looked up at him as if I was talking to him right there. And I said, I'm sorry, do what? See, I knew exactly what he was talking about because I'm a writer for a women's blog called the Grit and Grace Project that has tens of thousands of readers. I knew that was the blog to which he was referring to. The only problem was no one knew this story. Not even my family, not even my friends. So I was not about to publish it on the internet for the world to read. Oh no, I had to hide my pain. See, I thought on his suggestion for a few weeks. And finally I said, okay, God, I'll reach out to my publisher. I'll give her the idea. Knowing full well that this is not the type of stories that we publish on the Grit and Grace Project, I was so sure that I was safe. And my publisher responded, we cannot wait to read this article. Thank you for being so vulnerable enough to write it. My stomach dropped. But then I got busy. And the idea got lost in a sea of other ideas, and I didn't write the article. Now it's May of 2019. I'm preparing to go on a mission trip to Peru, which is coming quickly in June. but my plans are stopped dead in their tracks. While driving downtown, my car is hit by another driver. Brakes failed to stop. Brakes failed to work. See, the crash herniates 4 discs in my back and gives me head trauma. And now outside of physical therapy, I'm constrained to my bed. And again, I ask God, why did you do this to me? His answer was, this too will have purpose. The first few weeks I'm recovering from my head trauma, so I'm just sleeping fine. But the next few weeks I'm bored out of my mind, stuck in bed. And God says, remember that article I told you to write? You didn't write it. And now you have time. See, among other things, I knew that the accident was allowed to slow me down. My life had become so fast-paced that I could barely breathe, let alone write. But now I had all the time in the world. I processed and wrote and cried and processed and wrote and cried. And God said to me, oh, and I need you to finish it before Peru. See, now Peru was only a week away. And I thought, what is the significance of that? But I finished. I wrote the article. See, despite my excruciating back pain, I went to Peru in June of 2019. I knew God had something special for me there. I just didn't know what. See, God had brought the funds for the trip in less than 2 weeks of fundraising. He had spared my life in an accident the EMS said could have easily killed me, and my doctor had cleared me to travel if I could tolerate the pain. It was nothing less than miraculous that I was able to go. See, at this point, I'd been attending VU for 7 months, and I was going with the VU mission team, and one of the girls on my team had a story similar to mine. And God told me, give her the article you wrote. And I said, oh, so that's why I had to write this? No problem. And I gladly gave it to her, thinking that I was now released from having to publish the story for the whole world on the internet. See, while in Peru, we were ministering in the public schools, loving on and speaking life into kids ages 5 to 18. Each day we'd go to schools and do a presentation of dances, games, and skits about hope, identity. See, sometimes the assemblies were upwards of 1,000 students. And then at the end, somebody from our team would get on stage and give their testimony. But because we were in the public schools, the testimony had to be given without using the name of God. And then after each testimony, we would break the kids into small groups, discuss with them what they'd seen and heard. And to the Americans, we were partnered with a Peruvian as a translator and a co-lead. And my translator was a 19-year-old named Mafer. See, on day 2 of my trip to Peru, we were broken up into our small groups, and the kids had just seen the Lighthouse theming story of Jesus. And as we're talking, a little voice in my spirit said, tell them your story. I said, what? I said, tell them your story. You just wrote it out, fresh in your mind. Okay, I start telling myself, you can tell the story to a group of 15 teenage girls with the unfortunate hope that one of them might resonate with the story or find hope and healing in it. But it wasn't one. It wasn't 10. As we went from school to school, Mafer and I told our stories over and over to these small groups, mine of rape and hers of abandonment. And typically 50% of each group resonated with one of our 2 stories. We did hope, healing, and salvation prayers every day, multiple times a day. The numbers of girls that we were able to help bring healing to grew so large that I actually lost count. And so this was the purpose. There was more. The whole situation had become so emotional for me that I was crying all the time. I was crying even when I wasn't telling my story. I was a waterworks machine at every turn, from music to worship, hearing their stories, telling my stories. But I knew God was working, but I didn't know why I was so overcome with emotion. On the evening of day 3, God said, I want you to write your story out again, this time without using my name. I said, God, I'm so tired. So we got up at 5 a.m. We went to schools and did presentations all day. We had worship and services at night. We would get back to the hotel at 11 p.m. I started writing it and I fell asleep. God woke me up. He said, I need you to finish the story tonight. I got up and I wrote. I fell asleep after 1. 5 a.m. my alarm goes off again. Back at it, breakfast, on the bus, on the way to our next school. See, that day I carried my journal with me. I didn't know why, because I never carried it around. Again, I was crying, but nobody on my team knew why I kept crying, and I couldn't explain it because I didn't know. Still, nobody but Mafer knew my story. On the way to school on the 4th day, God spoke to me again. He said, today, I want you to get in front of the whole school, and I want you to tell them your story. Again, I looked around and I was like, is that God? But it was so clear, that still small voice. And he finished, at school number 2. I started to process what I had realized God just told me, and again, started crying hysterically. That's why I had to work through all of this. You can do it, he whispered. See, last night you wrote it all out without using my name. Not only can you tell it, but you have notes. I was speechless. I sobbed all the way to the first school. I cried all the way to the second school, anticipating the pain. I was shaking and trembling as my friends curled up in the seat with me, wrapping their arms around my shaking body. We arrived at the second school and did our presentation, this time in front of over 1,000 teenagers. Then it was time. I walked up in front of the assembly, my hands shaking as I was gripping the microphone for dear life. I struggled through my entire story, pausing for the translator, tears just running down my face. And when I finished, God whispered in my ear, "It is finished." See, in that moment, chains were broken. In that moment, the bag of bricks that I had been carrying around on my back for years had been cut off my back. So this is what it feels like to be set free. As tears ran down my face, I left the stage and went and joined the small group with Mafer, still shaking. As we got in the group, the students started to open up and share their stories. I was still amazed every time that after hearing our pain and vulnerability, they would tell us these horrible things that were happening to them that they had never told anyone. We prayed over thousands of kids that week, doing salvation prayers over children who've been raped, abandoned, and abused. As I was ready to leave, somebody brought an 11-year-old girl over to me. She said, "Can I ask you something?" Tears were running down her face. She said, "I live in a home of sexually abused girls. They need to hear your story." when I go home, I'm going to tell them your story so that they can have hope. Next time you come to Peru, would you come see us? God whispered in my ear again. Them. They are why you have endured this. Immediately, the purpose of all of it was clear. He said, I allowed this so that you could bring hope and healing to little girls in Peru. They need to know that what happened to them doesn't define them, that the pain that they're living in now doesn't have to be the pain of their whole life, that they can find hope and joy and happiness and love through Jesus despite the. God continued. He said, and you will never speak of your rape from a place of pain ever again. Now when you speak about your rape, you'll speak from a place of redemption. See, the final letter in your acronym is T. Tell your story. See, we like to hide our pain. We share everything on social media, but we isolate a little part of ourselves, sharing it with no one. Isolation. The devil feeds off isolation. He knows that when we're alone at our lowest point, he can feed us lies, telling us that we're broken, unworthy, and damaged. And when there's no one around to refute those lies, we believe him. The Bible speaks of the danger of silence and the power that it has over us. Psalm 39:2 says, I kept quiet, not saying a word, not even about anything good. But my suffering only grew worse, and I was overcome with anxiety. See, sharing your deepest secrets and pain brings it to light. It breaks the chains holding you captive and the bondage that's tormenting you. In John 8, Jesus says, if you believe what I say, you are truly my disciples. And then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. See, I'm here to empower you and encourage you to tell your story so that God can complete you, free you, and complete the purpose that he has for allowing your pain. See, there is purpose in your story. You don't even know the story that you walk in. Your pain wasn't for no reason. No one is changed or inspired by watching you live a perfect life. People are changed and inspired by watching you go from dark to light, hurt to healed, and broken to redeemed. Philippians 1:12 says, now I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. See, what has actually happened to you has happened to serve and advance the gospel. But if you keep it to yourself, it doesn't do anybody any good. I'll close with this. I'll never forget on the last day in Peru, I met a little girl named Kelly. Kelly was a refugee from Venezuela whose mother had took her to Peru to find a better life and had married a Peruvian, and she was raped by her Peruvian stepfather. She sobbed as she told me her story, and I was able to tell her my story, and of the feat I had the day before, telling my story as I was terrified in front of 1,000 students. She looked up at me wide-eyed in disbelief, and she said, since you have given me hope and been so brave, I want to be brave too. I'm going to tell my story in front of my school so the girls in my class will know that they can tell someone what's happening to them. See, if God delivered me, He can deliver you. If he can deliver you, he can deliver your sister, your daughter, your friend, the little girl being abused across the street. You don't even know the power that your yes holds, because inspiring one little girl, that little girl could go on to save her family, her school, or her nation. Our God is faithful. Do you believe it? See, Jesus' body was beaten and broken and hung on a cross, and it seemed like he lost the battle. He was full of pain and suffering. But God was working perfectly to accomplish his mission, which required Jesus to go through the pain and suffering, not around it, not avoid it. See, in the midst of tragedy, there's purpose. And we can have faith that while we suffer, God is at work. As his daughters, we are in a position to ask and keep asking for healing so that he can be glorified. Because this is so much bigger than you. That's the only reason that I went through what I did, was to see those little girls in Peru find Jesus. And it was all worth it. If you give it to God, you're then giving him the opportunity to use it, and he will. You're back on that canyon, but you're on the new platform. You've crossed the bridge. For me, it took one experience, 5 years healing. 5 years suppressing, 1 year healing, and one time telling my story to change everything. Philippians 2:13 says, "For it is God who works in you to will and act according to fulfill his good purpose." We may not learn why, but we will learn who. Who we can depend on when we're hurting. Acknowledge your pain. Commit to healing. Tell your story.
Thank you so much, Katey, for sharing your story, your vulnerability. I know that's going to really benefit so many people, especially in this summit, but also worldwide. And I can't wait for you to continue to share your story with other people. What I'm going to do right now is I'm actually going to have everyone go into breakout rooms for about 5 minutes just to debrief. And maybe if the story resonated with you, I want you to use this story and see what areas in your life right now that you have pain, maybe in your business, that we need to overcome, and how we can utilize that to move forward in your business, have that forgiveness. And I want to break that out into maybe about 5 minutes, and then we'll bring it back and go into the next session. I absolutely loved your story. Thank you so much, Katey.
Thank you, Sophie.